Hey, welcome to Scratching the Surface. I'm Jarrett Fuller, and this is the podcast about dismantling modernism. On this episode, I am joined by designer, educator, and curator Jerome Harris. Jerome was most recently a teaching fellow at MICA and just became the design director at Housing Works. But I was especially interested in talking to Jerome about a show that he curated last year called As Not For, a survey of African American graphic design. I was curious to hear about how this show came together and how working on it influenced his work and his teaching. We also talk about his circular path to graphic design, including being told by a Tyler School of Art admissions officer that his work actually wasn't graphic design, and his detour attempting to become a professional dancer. We also talk about his experience both as a student at Yale and then as a teacher at MICA and how he approaches this work and the importance of showing students as wide a range of work as possible. This is a great episode, I think, that went in a lot of different directions, and I'm so happy we got to have this conversation. I really hope that you enjoy it too. If you're a fan of the podcast and want to help support it, you can become a member for $5 a month or $50 a year. Members get an exclusive monthly newsletter that features behind-the-scenes content, links and articles from former guests about design, writing, and criticism, and previews of upcoming episodes. Scratching the Surface is fully supported through these memberships, so if you would like to help with the ongoing production of the podcast, I hope that you would consider joining. Thank you, as always, for listening, and here is me and Jerome Harris. So you originally studied advertising at Temple University in Philadelphia. What were you interested in at the time when you were studying there? Where did that kind of interest in advertising, or what kind of career direction were you thinking about then?
I was like 19, 20, 21.
Right. Yeah.
I had no idea, to be completely honest. I knew from what I had been doing, I was making side money designing party flyers. I had met a
Nice.
friend in college who was designing party flyers, and I told him, I was like, "Oh yeah, I'm pretty good with Photoshop." And so he tossed some jobs my way, and I got pretty good at it. Kind of picked up my own client, like promoters and stuff like that, and was doing that. But I actually started out at St. Joseph's University in West Philly. So it was like a weird, not weird. It was weird for me because it was a Jesuit college. I actually went there on a track and field scholarship, but I hated it. And I wanted to be doing what I didn't know exactly. Like I wanted to be doing graphic design.
Right.
I didn't have a portfolio to apply to art school, so I figured, okay, I'll study advertising at Temple. It's like the closest thing. So I went there, realized quickly that I wasn't going to be able to design anything, and then actually sent my party flyers to the Tyler School of Art, and
Nice.
got an email back from, I think, maybe the administrative assistant, or maybe I don't remember who was the chair. I don't know who it was. I'm pretty sure it was the chair. And I don't remember the exact message, but it was something along the lines of, "This is not graphic design. You don't have the skills to take classes in this program. And need to design. You need to apply with a proper portfolio." I don't remember the exact email. I don't even have access to it, but it was something like that. And I remember being confused because I was like, "But this is graphic design."
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
But yeah. So I finished Temple and actually realized I was like, I don't want to sell people stuff.
Right.
So I ended up moving to New York and pursuing my dream of becoming a professional dancer.
Okay. Did not see that coming as the next step. Okay, so I have a couple questions based on that. So you said that you were designing these flyers for your friends and stuff, that you were good at Photoshop, and then that you kind of discovered or realized that what you wanted to do was graphic design. So I kind of want to go back even maybe before college a little bit. How did you get a copy of Photoshop? How did you know what graphic design was? What was your understanding of graphic design at that time, and especially kind of being confused when the Tyler guy was like, "This isn't graphic design"? What was your kind of relationship to that word or that term at the time?
Yeah, so I had grown up with in a very Black family. So my favorite magazine that I read, probably more than my dad, who had the subscription to it, was Vibe magazine. And Vibe always had like really bombastic design,
Yeah.
really over the top typography, and like I didn't even know what it was called. I was like, oh, this is really cool. And so, and then like even the music I was listening to, was listening to, Bad Boy records out of P Diddy, Biggie Smalls, Total 112, and then like also like Cash Money records, all these things like Rockefeller
Yeah.
Records, Jay-Z. So like I was listening to all this stuff. So you got to imagine these are the images I'm intaking as like
Right.
a preteen teenager, and then I ended up taking a graphic design class in high school, and
Mm.
my teacher basically just like taught us like a few basic tools and Photoshop, and I don't even know if there was Illustrator then. This was like 2002, 2001.
Okay. Okay.
And she taught us a few tools and was like, okay, do a self portrait. Okay, make a collage. Like, there's high school projects.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I took a liking to the software. And even before that, this is even going back a little bit more. My mom actually, we had a desktop computer at the house that didn't have Photoshop. So my mom would ask me to make flyers for family events. We would do
Yeah.
like family cookouts, or she's been doing a toy drive for years and years now. Kind of collecting toys and then hand delivering them to families in need in New Haven, Connecticut. So I've been like, I actually still design that flyer every year.
That's awesome. I love that. Do you still do it? I hope you still do it on that old desktop computer,
No, I
and
wish
it's like the same one.
they don't have it anymore.
It's funny. I did the same way. We had like an old gateway computer that had I've told this story on the podcast before. Microsoft Print Shop Deluxe.
Yeah, that's what I use.
Yeah, and that was like my entry into graphic design as
Yep.
like a like 10, 11, 12-year old, and I would make flyers and I made signs, and um it was only later that I realized that I was kind of doing this stuff as like some of my earliest memories.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about finishing at Temple, moving to New York, and you said you then pursued your other dream to become a professional dancer, or tried to pursue that dream. And so could you talk about that time in your life? And basically, spoiler alert, you eventually end up at Yale studying graphic design again. And so I'm wondering how what you were kind of doing at that time in your life, and how graphic design came back into it, or maybe, not to make it too like narratively nice, how did that kind of time as a dancer get you back to design? You know what I mean?
Well, funny enough, I had never stopped.
Okay.
So when I moved to New York, um, I was initially I had a boyfriend out of college, and he was from Long Island. So we actually moved into his parents' attic for a couple of months while
Oh,
we both looked for jobs,
nice.
uh, and etc. So I ended up getting hired at a print shop, and I literally like walked in with I emailed them. I was like I was like, hey, you guys need a designer. And look, funny enough, the designer who was working there was leaving for a corporate job, and they were like, "Yeah,
Mm,
we do." So I walked in with this like crappy portfolio, like the black plastic cover with the sleeve
yeah.
that you insert 11 by 17s into. So I
Yeah.
printed out all of my flyers. It was I'm surprised I got hired. Like I printed out all my flyers, put them in this sleeve, and brought them down there. And the guy looked through them, and the designer was there, and he was like, "Come." He was like, "Come to the computer with me." So, so he was like, "Here, I'm going to give you." He was like, "This is." He gave me a real job at the print shop. He said, "I want
Yeah.
you to like, cut out this image, put it on this background, make a headline, blah blah blah." So I just like designed it pretty quickly. I was like pretty efficient with Photoshop at that time. And then the guy, my boss's name was Steve, and he was like, "Steve, he's good." And then he was like, "All right, when you start." It was it was like nothing. I wasn't even on, like, I literally got an envelope of cash. Like I wasn't even like on payroll.
Yeah, I
And
love that.
then
That's awesome.
and I'd made a bunch of really bad stuff, but it was almost like an intensive in the Adobe Creative Suite. which was
Yeah.
fun. And
Yeah.
I got to know the ins and out of like offset printing, digital printing, like pre-press, like all of that kind of
Yeah.
in the early 2000s, which is knowledge I still use right now. So, so I was actually, and my boss was cool. I told him I wanted to be a dancer, and so I eventually got signed to a dance agency. It was called a Clear Talent Group.
Oh,
So a lot of
nice.
like commercial dancers that you might see on like on TV commercials or dancing behind recording artists are usually represented by
Okay.
these by these agencies. So I ended up doing a few cool jobs. One of them that I always brag about because the only one that people really know is I was in the Step Up 3D, the dance movie.
Oh, yeah.
I did installation of that cheesy dance movie, but it was yeah, I was one of the dancers on the cast. That's my claim to fame. My
Now I feel bad. I'm pretty sure I only saw the first one of those
it's okay.
movies.
You don't even see, you literally, I have to like stop the tape so people can see where I am in the one scene that I got cast for.
Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome.
But you see my name in the credits, so I dance more in the credits than I do in the movie.
I love that.
The but yeah, that's how I went. I lived in New York. I was auditioning. My boss was really flexible. He was like, "Hey, as long as you get your work done by 5 or 6, you can do whatever you want." So I was like, "All right." And yeah, it was a nice little gig. It was fun because it was nice to have a dance community. It was a bunch of people like me who just like moved to New York trying to pursue their
Right.
dream of becoming a dancer. Then we all some of us are still friends now, and people are, we're all like fat, and some people have kids now, but like we all still take dance class. I still teach dance class actually, so it's
Oh, interesting.
it's still something that's with me, but I don't know if I'll ever pursue it as a career again. I actually can't. I've aged out, and I have a beer belly now, so it's not gonna happen.
Well, I mean, that was kind of going to be my next question. Is did you have some sort of tension between those during that time in your life between a I hesitate to use the word career, but a career as a designer versus a career as a dancer? Were those things that you were kind of both equally interested in? Was the design job just, this is what pays the bills while I try to do this other thing? What was that kind of relationship like?
This is a kind of indirect answer, but I
Okay.
always knew that. I think I watched my parents and my grandmother and my aunts and uncles work these jobs they didn't want to work.
Hmm.
They worked at a lot of my family worked at Pratt and Whitney in Connecticut, which built helicopter and airplane parts. But it was very good paying with insurance and all this, and so they were just trying to like working to live. And
Right.
I was like, I don't want to do that. So I'm glad my parents took care of me and uh, gave me a roof over my head and a chance to live the life that I wanted in a way. And I was like, if I'm going to work a job, I'm going to do something that doesn't feel like work.
Right. Right. Exactly.
I decided really early. So I was like, if I'm going to work, I'm going to work as a graphic designer, which I ended up doing in New York. And then I was like, then I want a career in dance. So
Hmm.
when I was working at the print shop, I loved it every day, going in there making making menus and decals for retail stores and stuff like that. But I liked it, and I liked pursuing, the grind of auditioning and meeting dancers and doing that stuff as well. So there was never any tension. They were both things that I like to do. I didn't even know what to call a career at the time, right? I was,
Right.
still kind of living paycheck to paycheck. And then when I did get a dance job, you get paid a lot of money, like, $3,000, $6,000, something like that.
Hmm.
But then you get no dance jobs for like a really long
Right. 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 Yeah, this is not a question that I was planning on asking you, but I kind of want to follow this thread for a while if we can.
Yeah.
And I will admit to you that I really don't know anything about dance.
Okay.
Um, did you see connections or are there relationships between design or the design process and dance or choreography? I feel like there are, and I've talked to other designers on this podcast who have been involved in dance in some way,
Mhm.
but we've never kind of talked about it. What do you have thoughts on that?
No, yes, I really tried. I actually, my MFA thesis was an attempt at using my choreographic data to generate graphic design.
Mm,
And I mean, I personally feel like it was a failure in a way, just because I was being in grad school at Yale was very difficult for me in a way. I was not coming from fine arts. I couldn't talk the talk.
mm,
I was actually getting learning two degrees at the same time. I was learning how to be a fine arts person at the same time as learning how to design and talk about my work, like doing things I had a bunch of things I had never done before.
right, right.
So, so it was. So I think that that thesis would have been better if I might have been mentally prepared for for that
Yeah,
whole
yeah, yeah, yeah. S-
crazy 3 years. But back to the connection. I'm sorry. the The only connection is in like kind of the data part of it. For example, when I when I make a piece of choreography, I don't like to repeat the same movement more than once or twice. So
Okay.
like formally, if I'm thinking about a poster, like a 24 by 36 poster as a piece of choreography, like temporally from the top left corner to the bottom right corner, I wouldn't want any crop as you scan the page to ever look the same. You know what I mean? So
Mm,
it's like,
yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, I know exactly what you mean.
so
That's
like
interesting.
there's kind of like this application of my musicality or like rhythm from my choreography into how I compose a page, or maybe do make a piece of motion. But this, I don't. Other than that, no,
Okay.
because they are two separate things completely,
Right.
and two separate processes in my head.
So, I mean, you mentioned that you kind of tried to connect them during your thesis and that your time at Yale was a challenge. So, if it's okay, I'd like to talk about that a little bit. Why did you decide to go back to school and what were you kind of interested in, or why what were you kind of thinking about at that time when you decided to go to Yale?
I think so I was burnt out in in New York, and
Yeah.
I was just tired. It really takes a beating on your ego to be
Yeah.
told no again and again and again at auditions, and I just decided to switch over into teaching dance. And I didn't stop designing party flyers because I needed money, but I started making self-generated work. So kind of work
Mm,
about being gay, work about being a dancer, doing design for dancers that I knew so that I could kind of work on figuring out what Jerome's graphic design looks like as opposed to doing what my clients wanted.
right. Right.
And um and I noticed that I was missing kind of a polish, or I knew there was something missing. I wasn't doing research. It was all kind of intuitive work. You know what I mean?
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, I knew I was like a smart person, but I didn't think of graphic design kind of an academic way. It was just kind of like open Photoshop, blank canvas. What am I going to
Right. Right.
do?
Right.
And so I kind of I taught myself like HTML and CSS, and I taught myself like InDesign and Illustrator, and started making books and making
Mm,
larger posters, and started doing things I had never done before, thinking about what I didn't even know was like typography, or you know what I mean, just like
right. Right.
playing with type in new ways. Um, and I knew, and because felt that, I was like, oh, there's something that my work doesn't look like this work, but it can. I know it can. Like I'm
Yeah.
looking online, I'm looking at when I go to the bookstore, when I go to museums, or go to the gallery and pick up printed material. I'm like, this is so nice. How can why does
Yeah.
my work look like this? So
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
that's why I applied to grad school. I felt something missing, and I did the 3 year program, so the
Oh,
preliminary
yeah.
year wasn't the MFA program. It's just like graphic design boot camp for 1 year.
Mhm. Right.
And that I think that was like partially one of the most important graphic design learning intensive years of my life, because I worked in all mediums, and I was really I was really frustrated because my teachers were like, "Think conceptually, Jerome," and I was like, "What the fuck is that?
Right,
Why?
right, right.
What?" You know, and learning how to just working my creative muscles and learning how, because I mean, conceptual thinking in itself is a skill that needs to
Yeah,
be honed. You don't even need to design anything. Like, it's just a thing that you can do through sketching or writing, just to get the thoughts out. And for me, that was the biggest takeaway that first year. And then moving into the master's year, then I was super insecure because I'm in there with all these people who know all these big
right.
words and worked all these amazing jobs. I'm like, shit, I just made this apply to a party flyer.
Right. But I mean, there must have been something in those party flyers, you know, like there had to have been something that got their eye to get you there.
I think so. I thought there was one project I did in the class with Laurel Schwartz. I always say her name wrong.
Oh
Sorry.
yeah, yeah,
One I did took a interactive class with her, but we had to make images based on a Twitter feed of our choice, and it was every day for 30 days or something like that. So I chose this gay rapper Leaf from Brooklyn, and I that was the first time I didn't feel the pressure to design things that looked modernist or like anything like this. I was kind of like, I'm gonna go back to my party flyer, you know,
mm,
days, and I would make these ridiculous collages that just in this working the same way I was before, as with party flyers, but then with the Yale weirdness in there, like scanning stuff and moving on the scanner.
yeah, yeah,
And so so then I think some of my classmates were like, "This is really cool," and I was like, "Well, this is what I was doing anyway." Like,
yeah, yeah.
I was like, "For me, this is regular. Why aren't you doing this?"
Can you talk more about that? This is something that I think about a lot, of this like idea of amateurism,
Hmm.
I guess you could kind of say.
Yeah.
And I've been thinking a lot about my own undergraduate design experience and how kind of like what you're talking about. There was something that was like very intuitive about it. I was just kind of going with my gut. I was just kind of making things all the time in these like different ways. And then somehow through education, through working, through bosses, whatever, some of that amateur niche, some of that intuitiveness gets beat out of you.
Yeah.
And I even think like thinking conceptually or thinking, you know, something, everything has to have some sort of meaning. It almost can sometimes do the inverse of what it's trying to do because you're like putting all of these rules or pressure. How did you kind of think about that while you were in school and you were kind of learning all of these new things? You were learning to think conceptually, but you're also like going back to your old work. How do those things start to come together for you?
Um, I think, and this is also a reason why I feel like my kind of thesis. Well, I don't think it completely failed, but I looking back, I feel like it could have been much better. But I felt the
Yeah, of
pressure
course.
to
I think everybody thinks their thesis could be better
make.
after they're done with it.
But I felt the pressure to make this like seductive modernist work, you know. And then the
Mm,
work that I was making that was kind of in the vein of what I was doing before. My professors could didn't respond to. They couldn't
mm,
respond to it. I feel like they would look at it and they would say they wouldn't say it was bad, but it clearly was a bad critique. But
right.
I also just thought, well, you don't know where I'm coming from, you know.
Yeah.
For me, it almost felt like an identity thing. You know what I mean? I'm presenting a new um, characteristic to you. I remember one of my professors actually told me, based on the way I spoke in class was super casual. He was like, Jerome, do you ever are you familiar with like code switching or changing
Mm.
registers? And I was kind of like, no, I'm just the same person all the time. And but it didn't really hit me until I went home that night, and I was like, oh, he wants me to be like a upstanding Negro. I see, like, you know, he
Right.
wants me to be
Yeah.
like a more proper in this context. It really didn't make I didn't I whatever. It was kind of it hit me kind of hard. Um, but
Yeah.
but yeah, yeah. The I forgot now. I forgot the question.
just kind of like how, I mean, because you're talking about you're kind of like answering the question
Yeah.
already, but you're talking about kind of how hard your time at Yale was because you didn't have this kind of art background. You're
Oh,
learning how
yeah.
to think conceptually, but you're also kind of realizing that that early work was, there
Man,
was something to that, and how all of those things start to come together for you, how you kind of worked through all of these different things. I mean, even kind of being subtly told that your work needs to be modernist, or that your point of view isn't maybe quote unquote good design. How do those things start to come together for you to start kind of generating new work and new ideas?
um, okay. Part one.
Do you know what I mean? Does that make sense? I've said a
Okay,
lot there.
I got you. So part
Okay.
one, I got in like screaming matches with like Abake and like who else was I arguing with? Irma Boom. Like
Okay.
I'm like people are telling me like this is like the most important workshop you ever do in your life, and I'm like, why? This is dumb. So that was my time at Yale. It was all these capital G, capital D graphic designers telling me what I was doing wasn't good enough, and I'm like, well, tell me why. I was like, I think you just don't know what I'm doing.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
but I also was seduced, and even like my classmates were doing really cool experimental stuff, and I was like, oh yeah, that's cool too. But like, I didn't understand why. Anyway, so that was
Right.
it was crippling self doubt and also insecurity, and also a little bit of like fighting back because I was just kind of like, well, tell me why so I can fix it.
Yeah.
So that's the first part. And then moving forward, I think that I've tried to start um, working working in new experimental. Like I think I didn't get grad school until I finished, and then when I
Yes. I know exactly what you mean.
and then when I finished, I was like, oh shoot, I have like all these. Like I think I was in a better like my mental health was a little better. I had like money in my pocket, and I was kind
Yeah.
of like, oh yeah, I feel better. So I was working for an organization called Art Space, and I did kind of the visual identity. Art Space is an arts nonprofit in New Haven, by the way, and I
Okay.
did the visual identity for an annual event they have called Citywide Open Studios. And I think that's the first time that I really got to show my chops because I got to make everything myself, and I really made a whole visual identity system, and then pumped out like up to like 50 deliverables for like print, web, motion pieces, animated banners, social media, all of this by myself. And I was kind of like, oh, I couldn't have done this before because I was literally doing one piece and sending it to the client. Whereas now I was able to, I was able to see all the skills that came out. But then I started doing this 2D flat stuff, and whereas before I was doing kind of more dimensional, glowy, blingy stuff, kind of in the vein
Mm.
of like a pen and pixel, like Cash Money Record
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
tapes. And so I think I also had to catch myself, and I was like, why? I was like, it was even kind of difficult for me to start stepping back in that direction because I got out of the habit of working in that way.
Yeah.
So I think slowly as I started doing more and more freelance work, I started moving back toward that direction. With that kind of like ability to think through and do and research, have a kind of a research based process and approach graphic design.
I wanna try to connect this a little bit maybe to the exhibition that you curated. This was that earlier this year?
That was in
Is it,
September. That was
so okay.
the first time I showed it, and then it's like all over the place now.
Okay, so you curated this exhibition called "As Not For: Dethroning Our Absolutes," and this exhibition, which I will admit I've only seen pictures of, I didn't get to experience it
Yeah,
in real life, but it is a kind of survey of uh, Black graphic designers throughout history,
yeah,
and I'm wondering if I'm wondering if you could kind of talk about where this came from, because kind of hearing you talk about professors telling you about code switching and that these certain modernist principles are important and that your work should be a certain way and come from a certain place. and you kind of fighting against that, saying you don't really kind of understand who I am or where I'm coming from or what my point of view is. I feel like these are connected in some way.
Yeah.
And I feel like the way that we often talk about design history is that modernism is kind of the pinnacle. Is this still is what good design is kind of how we talk about it.
Yeah.
uh, and this is a topic that comes up on the podcast all the time, that design history, that is a very limiting way to talk about design history, and that there are a lot of people, there are a lot of ideas, there are a lot of cultures that are kind of completely written out of that.
Yeah.
And could you talk about the exhibition and how that's kind of trying to remedy this, and also how you started to think about this and kind of realizing that these things you're being taught are actually just one point of view, not gospel?
Yeah, I think I realized it's pretty. My first year in grad school, I
Yeah.
took a design history class with Doug Scott, and everybody knows Doug Scott.
Yeah. Yeah.
Everybody if you went to RISD or Yale, you've taken design history with him. So his seminar was for me almost life changing because
Mm.
I never thought to research design. Like I didn't think it mattered who designed the typeface,
Mm. Yeah.
and thinking about historical context in design. So I do have to give him props for that. But there were no black people in his lectures.
Mm-hmm.
And I was kind of like, well, as the only black person in the program, I was like, well, where's the black people? So
Yeah.
the we had to do a design research project and then present like a book about our figure. So most people chose kind of April Greiman and Wolfgang Weingart and
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
the classic Steven Sagermeister, that guy, and and I chose Buddy Esquire, who was a party fly designer for during the rise of hip hop
Mm.
and in the 70s and 80s. And in my effort to do research, I couldn't find anything on him. Cornell had a really cool archive of hip hop party flyers that I did a lot of my kind of visual research from. And then there was a woman at Cornell, Amanda Lalonde, I hope I'm saying her name right, who wrote an extensive kind of bio on Buddy Esquire. This is really all I had to go off of.
Huh.
And then a
Okay.
lot of it was just kind of like speculative, like with the understanding that he was, like, for example, inspired by uh, Art Deco, because he says it.
Mm.
He's like he was really into Art Deco posters and architecture. Some of his flyers kind of mimic Art Deco facades on government buildings in the Bronx. So it's easy for me to
Mm.
believe that he was looking at this and being like, let me, one for
Yeah.
one transferring this, but not also abstracting it. So it's like whatever. So, that was the first time I ever did that, but it was so difficult, and I kind of stopped doing that kind of like Black graphic design research then. When I finished school, I kind of picked it back up. I discovered other people like Phase Two, who I actually interviewed. He's still alive. I interviewed him in
Mm.
the AIGA Iron Design Worth issue, which came out last month, 2 months ago. And then more and more people kept popping up. I was finding out about all these designers in Chicago, Leroy Winbush, Emmett McBain. And I was like, but like the funny thing is that these guys were also like kind of trained by guys from the Bauhaus or working in advertising agencies, working in modern
Right.
expression. I'm like,
Right.
why do I not hear about these guys? So then that's kind of that was kind of the impetus for the show. When I got hired as a teaching fellow at MICA, we were required to do, me and Minsun Eo, shout out to Minsun. He was the other fellow, graphic design teaching fellow. And we both did research. And it was really funny because we ended up doing research in our own identity. He did Hangul typography,
Oh,
integrating,
nice.
integrating Hangul typography with the English language in effective ways, which I thought was amazing. And then I did kind of a history of survey of African American graphic designers of the 20th century. And so it was supposed to be a book. And Brockett Horn, the chair, she suggested, she was like, "Why don't you make an exhibition?" And I was like, I was like, "Don't give me a challenge because I'll do it." And I did it.
Yeah.
And I had never curated before. I had never like written academically kind of beyond graduate school. And um, I just took it on. I went to Chicago a couple times. There was so much to look at University of Chicago,
Oh,
University of Illinois,
nice.
Chicago campus. University of Houston has a huge pen and pixel archive of all the Cash Money and Master P, Snoop Dogg artwork. Um, where else? The list goes on and on. I kept discovering so many archives, and then even in the back of my head, I was kind of like, I bet you there's stuff in like somebody's grandmother's basement that I'm never
Yeah.
gonna see.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was a very graphic designerly show. It was a poster show. It was a what somebody called a meta poster show because it was posters of posters sometimes. So
Oh, right. Because you reproduce them all at the same
yeah,
size
yeah,
within a kind of standard poster format.
yeah. So it was like a scale. Some things, nothing was really to scale. Everything was either scaled up, except for the W.E.B. Du Bois posters, which are scaled down.
Mm,
Um, and I did the show, and I ended up getting a lot of press. I was on the Afropunk website, on the AIGA
yeah.
design website, and I was just kind of like, okay. I was like, you guys like this, don't you? I was like, I thought I was going to put up the show and take it down and go on about my life. Yeah, and so the show's traveled. It's been at VCU. It's been at RISD. It's been at City Tech in Brooklyn. It's going to MCAD,
Mm,
Minneapolis College of Art.
yeah.
Yeah. It's been at CCA in San Francisco and Oakland. Yeah, it's really weird, for me it's hard because it was a selfish project. It was like
Right.
I need to know, I need to be able to prove to people the reason why my work looks the way it does, and also I need to be able to prove to myself that there were other Black designers in the field because I don't see too many Black people in the field, or I didn't see
Yeah.
too many Black people. So I did this show, and all the Black people came out the woodwork, and I'm like, where were y'all?
Right. I almost feel like there is something in the, you said you did this kind of selfishly and to kind of prove to yourself. I'm thinking about that administrations person at Tyler who said this isn't graphic design. That in some weird way this is a response to that guy, saying, look at all of these party flyers designed by these great designers who were also trained by Bauhaus guys, just like just like you were.
And the funny thing is also that like even when I was at Yale, I also couldn't argue back why my work was good, right? It was, they wouldn't
Mm-hmm.
say your work is bad. They would say in art school critique language. But I also couldn't be like, well, if you look at Buddy Esquire and Pen and Pixel, I'm actually using heavy layering and Photoshop.
Right,
See,
right.
I didn't have that language to explain it. I was kind of like incapable. So now I feel like for me, it was just kind of being able to give receipts, as they say in the Real Housewives of Atlanta.
Right. Well, that was kind of my next question. Actually, I was kind of curious how doing this research and putting together this show, how has it changed how you think about both your work specifically, but also just graphic design as a field or as a profession?
I actually just wrote about this in the Amalgam magazine by
Okay.
Pooja. I can't think of his last name right now. Which that should be coming out. But it's called that article is called Against but in the Spirit of Modernism.
Mm,
And just kind of like goes over how modernism was trying to fight against like the Renaissance and the Enlightenment in a way, and these antiquated kind of traditions, and bring about the new. And now modernism is now that antiquated uh,
right, right,
traditional
right.
method of working with text and image, which now needs to be needs a new modernism needs to happen. And I think about like postmodernism too, but like I still feel like there's another step that can be taken.
I'm curious how these ideas that you're talking about, of kind of both rethinking design history and how we talk about it, and kind of the work that inspires you. How do these ideas come into the classroom now that you're also teaching
Yeah,
design? Are they kind of influencing that?
Well, I think if anything, what I'm not doing is trying to make my classroom a mini Bauhaus, which is what I feel like a lot of graphic design teachers do.
Yeah.
I'm not going to call anybody out, but I feel like a lot of people do that, and I tend to show a wide range of work. I show amateur work. I show zines. I show music videos.
Mm,
I do show commercial work, but I also show like work by up and coming designers. I try to show a range. I show other students work. Like I try to show everything.
yeah.
I and I'm not everybody does that, and I think that what happens is my students' work ends up being in their own kind of combination of what they're interested in, as opposed to me art directing what I think
Right.
their work should look like, or just showing them a limited set of work and saying, okay, work in this narrow framework.
Right. Right.
So I think if anything, that's the way that my interests feed into it. I have a larger interest in, I just don't have as much time as I want, but I would like to research kind of more American subcultures
Mm,
and beyond hip hop definitely, because that's what I grew up with. But like thinking about like Chicano culture, or thinking about like I don't even know if
yeah.
Native Americans were making graphic design, but if they were, I'm pretty sure it was pretty cool. I just want to know. I want to know what people were doing on the margins, and kind of trying to find a way to like respectfully honor that and my work. What I find interesting about it.
Yeah. I have two questions about that, and these might be completely selfish questions
Okay.
to be honest. I think I'm really liking what you're saying about how you're trying to not have the classroom just be a mini Bauhaus or a new Bauhaus,
Yeah.
um, which I agree. I think a lot of design education is trying to kind of just kind of continue that. And that's what my undergraduate graphic design education was like. And so when I started teaching, kind of, I had all of these ideas of how I was going to do things differently. And then my first year of teaching was basically just doing, teaching in a very similar way to the way I was taught, because I knew how to do that, and it made it easier to present things and talk about things. And
Yeah.
now the longer I've been teaching, I've been trying to move away from that a little bit and trying to get into more of this mode that you're talking about. I'm curious how your students respond to this, especially when they might have other professors who are telling them otherwise. um, how do you kind of navigate that of being, hey, I'm showing you a bunch of different things, there are other people who will say that this is wrong, but guess what, it's not. Are students into that? Are they kind of self-conscious about it? What's that experience like?
I don't know. It's 2018, 2019. This last school year was really weird because students don't talk. They don't talk. I asked them to participate in class. They don't say anything. So partially, I don't know. But
Okay.
but they do gossip, and the students that do are my fans. They tell me that students who don't like my class tend to think that I teach too loosely, like I'm not super didactic, which I do on purpose because I'm like,
Yeah.
figure it out. Like
Yeah, I'm the same way.
here's the tools. Okay, go home and think about it, and then I'll correct you next week. And but some of my students like that. They like the autonomy.
Hmm.
I think I've learned that I do have to be a little didactic. I do have to give them, like, I've started putting like make a numbered list of requirements for homework assignments, for example, and then grading based on that, because they don't know what to do on their own sometimes.
Right.
But okay, back to your question. The I f- look, I'll tell you this. I've had, I don't I'll say a dozen plus students of color come to me and tell me I'm not getting enough feedback in class from my professor. Can we meet one on one to talk about my projects?
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
and this isn't just black kids; it's Asian, Middle Eastern, South Asia, like everybody. I've almost become this kind of like outspoken, person of color in the department who they feel comfortable with. Um, who coming to you and saying, "Hey, I did work about my identity, but nobody knows how to talk about this," or I'm being told that I should lessen my cultural my
Hmm.
background in my work and make it more quote unquote professional. And that really pissed me off. So I don't know. I really pull them aside and try to talk to them, try to talk them through it, let them know, I mean, a lot of times, and this isn't even like bashing white people, but like a lot, I think white people just don't. It's really easy to live a default white life,
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
not
Yeah. Yeah.
and not you might not even be trying to be an asshole, but like you just don't know what to say just because you never encountered that thought before. You
Right.
know? But I do feel like it's you need to take the responsibility of getting your student the resource, and I think it's important, especially if they want to do work on identity, and you say, I can't help you, but let me get you somebody who can.
Right. Right.
So
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's you are talking about something that I think about every day in the classes that as a straight white man who's teaching predominantly international female students.
yes,
Um, I'm kind of confronted with this literally every class. Uh, and so and it's why I'm thinking about all of this stuff that we're talking about of, am I just showing all the same white dudes in class again,
yeah,
um and so it's I feel like all of this stuff we're talking about is kind of, we have to rethink the whole system of how we teach design. Otherwise, it is going to be that take out your identity, make this more corporate, which what does that even mean, in
yeah.
that context?
Yeah, I think I said something a little controversial in a faculty meeting recently because we were given a task to assess student juniors rising juniors
Mhm.
student
Yeah.
work. And I was largely disappointed because it just looked like copy, like they looked at things that look good, like they looked at
Yeah.
Chobani redesign
Yeah.
or cool things on the internet, and then they just copied it, and it looks clean and like resolved, but it's not the work of a graphic designer. So I said in the meeting, I was like, this is the work of a production artist. This isn't the work of a graphic designer. And if that's what you want to teach in a college, you might as well go to
Mhm.
portfolio school, go to like art school, do
Yeah.
that. Because they're not learning what they're supposed to be learning in this place. And I've got a little bit of fire for that. But uh, I mean, I wasn't. It's true though. They're not learning how to be graphic
Yeah.
designers. They're going to be looking. They don't know how to think. That's the part that's
Yeah.
missing. So
Well, can you talk more about that? Because again, this is something that I actually talked about this with my students. We were just kind of having an informal discussion about the design field and that sort of thing to wrap up the semester, and they were talking about how they enjoyed in this class being able to kind of do work that meant something to them and that was different, and giving them space to kind of be a quote unquote experimental, and that they were fearful that when they move into the quote unquote real world that they won't be able to do that anymore, and that they will have to just be those kind of production artists, and basically kind of asking, is that what we should be learning here, is just how to do that other thing instead of this like stuff that's from ourselves. And so it's like a thing that they're thinking about of, how do I navigate my education so I can have the best portfolio to get a job? How do you talk about that balance, either with other faculty or even just with your students who are kind of thinking about these questions?
um, I think that I taught a class called it's GD4 at MICA, but it's basically like it's like partially conceptual thinking, partially like system
Hmm.
development in a way. So learning how to think systematically, make a machine, and then pump your content through it and see what happens on the other end. So learning how to build the machine and then learning how to think conceptually to assemble the machine in a way, if that makes sense.
Right.
So they that class complained about me so well. I learned after the fact at the end of the semester, and it made Brockett really nervous about me because because the students really didn't understand that I was pushing them way further than they were thinking way
Right.
harder conceptually than they'll ever have to think on any job that they'll ever have. But I've explained to them along the way, when you get a job, you're going to have like a creative director and an art director and maybe like a senior designer, and then you're just going to have like all these ideas that are never going to make it to the top. So
Right.
like
Right.
so what you need to do is learn how to be generative, make a bunch of stuff, and then like have all these things to choose from, and then be select, learn how to edit, all these things. And they didn't get it until the very end when it was time for them to put their machine to work. And they were making stuff, and they were like, "Huh, this doesn't work. I need to change this." And I was like, "Exactly." It's like you,
Right.
you know.
Right. Right.
And so it was. Some of my students really still praise me to this. They're graduating seniors, and they were like, "I loved your GD4 class."
Nice.
Some of them just completely avoid me and don't talk to me at all. So,
I think that always happens.
but it's the that rigor is kind of like I put say this. I mean, in all my classes, I teach interactive design too, and I let them know like, okay, learning how to code HTML, CSS is important because if you get a product design job at a at a I don't know, digital agency, whatever. You're gonna have to do a mock-up of an app or something like this and just code it yourself, and then you send it off to
Right.
production or the developer who actually does the thing for real. Um, and it's important for you to know how to think interactively for like UX UI design, So like,
Mhm.
but I
Mhm.
say this in class just to try to make it one for one for them, even though it's still abstract in their head,
Right.
like they're like a job, you know. So-
Yeah. 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 You started mentioning a little bit about this already, but I'm kind of curious about what you're thinking about now. What are your research interests? What's kind of work are you interested in right now? What's next for you at this point?
I think after this exhibition as not for, I am actually really tired of talking about race and diversity and inclusion.
Okay. I'm sorry.
No, 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 it's okay. It's okay because I think I'm also realizing that with my kind of exhaustion of talking about it, I do feel like it's like white people need to be like the dicks that are white people need friends who are saying, "Hey, you're being a dick. Just calm down." Because I mean,
Yeah.
I can't do it.
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
like the white people who are a little more level headed need to be like, "Hey, this is cruel. Like, you need to stop doing this." Like, I'm tired of being. Black people of color shouldn't have to do it anymore. So I'm actually kind of interested. I'm a big gamer, and there are so many little nuances in game design and graphic. It's such a rich
Mm.
um, visual language. It's really tacky all at the same time, bright colors and explosions and
Yeah.
meters,
Yeah.
but like you can extract things out of it, and I feel like and build beautiful compositions. So I'm really interested in building fantasy worlds and thinking about video games that I'm obsessed with and borrowing kind of language. I made a book in grad school that I love, which instead of having page numbers, there's a health meter at the top, and you die at the end of the book.
Yeah.
And so and that was like maybe like the first time that I ever did it, and I was like, I want to go back to that. I kind of want to always use health meters as page numbers,
Yeah.
and like I want to just start bringing kind of that language into kind of traditional graphic design.
Yeah. That's hilarious.
So yeah, I think it's and I'm also, I mean, I think you get the I'm a huge goofball. Everything's I can't take a lot of things seriously because I will be sad and depressed in my head.
Yeah.
So I have to laugh, let a lot of things go. So with that being said, I think building fantasy worlds and doing deep
Yeah.
research into these things, and also there's not much academic literature on it, so I would have to go to developers and interview them and actually talk to graphic designers and at Square Enix and Disney and
Right.
about what they're thinking. So.
Oh, that sounds awesome. What are your favorite books or authors or people that have really influenced kind of how you think about design, how you think about design history, teaching, kind of all of this that we've talked about today? Who are the people or the books that have really kind of shaped that?
That's really interesting. They're not design books.
Okay, yeah, that's okay. I didn't mean for them to be you know designers.
The thing about it is hard because a lot of The things that I think I theorize in my head aren't things that I necessarily have read.
Oh, interesting.
In a way, like the way that I've talked to you about, like how choreography and kind of rhythm kind of
Yeah.
influences my compositions. I do. Okay, I do think John Gamble. Shout out to John Gamble, my first type teacher, for giving me Robert Bringhurst's Elements of Typographic Style.
Right. Yeah.
And then hand in hand, I have to shout out my 10th grade English teacher who introduced me to the elements of style.
Oh, nice.
Because I think that I think I learned more and more. The better I feel at typography, the less I feel like I know.
Right. Yeah.
And the thing about it is that we were having this conversation on Twitter. There's a bunch of us who I started a thread because I was complaining about W.A. Dwiggen's naming graphic design.
Oh, I saw a little of this thread. Yeah.
And so, but somebody responded and was talking about how important literacy was. And I was like, this is so true, because like the more you get into type, the more you understand a person will read this, and you have to make the
Right.
language readable and legible. Like it has to be beautiful and it has to be something that makes sense to people. And then also when I getting into writing has been helpful. So like this, I guess this is kind of more of a technical than theoretical thing, but knowing how to edit texts, and then
Yeah.
like also knowing how to arrange text in the best possible way to make it readable, I think is important. I use the term literacy engineer as opposed to
Oh,
graphic
I like that.
designer, because I think that is actually what we do.
Yeah, that's great. That was such a great way to end this too. Jerome, this was such a fun conversation for me. I enjoyed talking to you and kind of thinking about all of this stuff and thinking through all this stuff with you. Thanks so much for being on the podcast.
Yeah, thank you.
This episode was recorded on May 14th, 2019. Our theme music is by Andy Borgasani. We're on Twitter and Instagram at Surface Podcast. You can find us wherever you get your podcasts at scratchingthesurface.fm. Thanks for listening.